everyone, and welcome to episode 17 of the Simply Great Relationships podcast. We're so glad that you could join us today. We're talking about a really important topic today. I'm Marina. This is Meredith Silversmith, and today we are going to talk about the scary stuff. Something that I think a lot of people are really scared of because it's Halloween week.
Yes.
Vulnerability.
Yep.
Not an easy topic for a lot of people, so we want to tackle the scary stuff head on. We'll be covering what is vulnerability, what makes it scary to be vulnerable, why it's important to be vulnerable in your relationship, and how to become more open with your partner. So make sure you stay until the end because we have a really great bonus for you, and we'll tell you how to get it at the end.
Awesome.
So
vulnerability. What is vulnerability? I think that's like everyone knows the word, but what is it really? I always think of it as sort of exposing yourself, and it can be in different ways, right? So physically, mentally, emotionally, like exposing yourself in a way that you're risking harm. But I think what we're talking about today in the context of a relationship is risking harm in an effort to build a closer, more trusting, more open relationship.
Yeah, I think vulnerability is one of those words that like people don't always have a hard time defining it. They like don't always know what it is. They're just like, I don't want to be that. I just know that it feels too risky. It feels too exposing. It feels too open. It's not how I want to feel. And there's like a fear element to it, right? Because when we're vulnerable, we're putting our stuff out there. We don't know how it's going to be received. And a lot of times the fear is it's going to be received in a negative way. Our partner will view us differently. Our family will view us differently. We will view ourselves differently. So there's a lot of risk, a lot of fear that really makes sense when it comes to being vulnerable.
Yeah. And I think, we're not going to delve super deep into, what is vulnerability, because I think that's a really kind of profound question. But there's a fantastic video that Brene Brown did. If you don't know who Brene Brown is, she's a mental health professional who has done a lot of talks. She's written a few books. She's a really great resource, and she's got a fantastic TED Talk on vulnerability, so we'll include the link in the show notes. But it's about 20 minutes, so take some time and watch that, just to sort of to put I think everything we're going to talk about today in the greater context would be really helpful.
Yeah, she's great. She's kind of the queen of vulnerability. She's really opened up that conversation on a larger scale. So I love that TED Talk. So I guess the big question is, what makes it scary to be vulnerable?
Yeah. Well, I think in the context of a relationship, we want to show our best side a lot of the time. So we want to be our best self, our strongest self for our partner. And to be vulnerable is to say, well, maybe I'm not perfect, or maybe I'm not the strongest. A lot of people see vulnerability as weakness, I think, and that's sort of societally how it's viewed. You have to be strong, especially where we live. I think in New York especially, being vulnerable is a no-no. And, we're sort of saying that vulnerability is a strength. The ability to do that and open up is a way of being more open, more, in a closer relationship, more real, more genuine.
I love that you use the word genuine, because I think vulnerability is really tied to like being in touch with your genuine self and being able to put that genuine self forward. And our genuine selves, or at least like I can talk about my genuine self. My genuine self is not strong all the time, not perfect all the time, not perfect ever. But, like my genuine self struggles with a lot of stuff and has a hard time with a lot of stuff. And I know for me it was like a really long journey, especially when I started dating George, because I think like when you're dating in the beginning phase of a relationship, like you really want to be perfect you. And I think at least I looked at vulnerability as like a burden. Like, well, if I tell you my stuff, you're going to think I'm crazy. You're going to think I'm needy. You're going to think I'm this. You're going to think I'm that. I'd rather just be like the perfect chick who's just like chill and happy and great and relaxed and independent and not, like not too needy and just got her shit together all the time. But that's not the reality of any human being.
No.
And I think it's really hard to start exposing those parts of yourself that say like, I am struggling with this right now, or this was really hard for me. This was really emotionally for me. This is really emotional for me.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it scary is like when George and I started dating and I had to, start letting him in and he had to start letting me in, like it was scary because you're still like feeling each other out. And when we started dating, pretty soon into it, his grandfather passed away, and that was like a really vulnerable moment for him. And I remember like that kind of changed the course of our relationship, because I think he was actually like quite open. And it almost like kind of took me back.
Yeah.
You know?
Like such a sudden openness and sudden vulnerability.
Yeah. That it almost took me back, and I was like, oh my God, he's like human. And it made me look at him as stronger, and like I think it made me fall in love with him more.
Yeah.
But I think it's like we have such a skewed wiring when it comes to vulnerability in terms of like, well, we shouldn't be vulnerable and then we're a lot more likable.
Yeah.
When really, like, when George was more vulnerable, I was like, oh my God, like, it humanizes you so much, and it just, like, let me in so much that it just drew me to him so much more.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Aw. We love George. He's a good guy. So that makes sense, wanting to be your best self, not kind of knowing how to navigate that, especially when it's new early on in a relationship. I think what's also challenging is often vulnerability forces you into a place where you have to sort of connect with something you're not necessarily thrilled to be connecting with. For that example with George, his grandfather passed away. That wasn't really a secret from the relationship, right? So it wasn't something that had happened years ago. It wasn't something that you didn't know about. It was a little more present. And at times I think those are maybe more natural to open about. But some things that can come up, being vulnerable, talking about unresolved issues from the past with friends or family or previous relationships, trauma in the past. A lot of the couples we see, one or both partners have had some sort of trauma. Feelings of guilt or shame, fears. There's a lot of stuff that we sort of often hide from ourselves, let alone from other people.
Yeah, and it's kind of like self-protective, like talking about our self-esteem, self-worth, self-image, insecurities. Like, we build so many really great, big, thick, protective mechanisms to not have to access that stuff. And all of a sudden, to have to access it can be really, really scary.
Absolutely. And then there's a lot of fears associated, right? So it's worries about, if I share this, what's going to happen, right? So if I share this, will I be judged? If I share this, will I look weak? Will I get emotionally overwhelmed? Or would my partner get emotionally overwhelmed, right, by me sharing this? And I think that's something that I have definitely struggled with. And it was funny, as you're sharing your story about George, Tom and I have been dating. We've been together for so long. We've been together like over 12 years. So it would be harder to really have to think back to in the beginning when we were sort of building things in that way. But definitely something that I know that I'm actively have been working on for years is I'm someone who, when I get upset, I shift to anger really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So, especially with Tom, I would have to really, I might be huffy and quiet and sort of closed off in an effort to keep back the sad or the upset. And it didn't even necessarily have to do with him, but just not wanting to be vulnerable, right? Not wanting to kind of open the floodgates and just kind of put it on the table what was upsetting me or what was on my mind. Definitely, I think something that I've struggled with, and I see in a lot of people that we meet with, where you really just want to, you're like holding it back, and then as therapists, we like to crack it open.
Yeah. Well, it's like it's the iceberg, right? Yeah. Like that little tip that you see above water, that's the anger, and that can be the really loud, like visceral, like get it out anger, or it can be that really quiet, reclusive, let me isolate myself anger. But the giant part that's submerged, that's those vulnerable feelings we don't want to address for ourselves. Like those feelings are scary for us.
Yeah.
And that's usually like the sadness, the loneliness, the hurt, the feelings of rejection, all that stuff that, like, when you think about it, you want to cry. That we're protecting. You're like, well, I'd rather feel this much easier above water feeling than submerge into the real feeling. But I think the really, really valuable part of accessing, and that's the vulnerability, right? Yeah. Like that's that submerged part of the iceberg. That's the vulnerability. The really amazing part about accessing that is, it's like, if you name it, you tame it. Anger is really hard to tame. Anger is really easy to name. Yeah. Really hard to tame, because anger, again, it's like that kind of artificial, quick and dirty mechanism. Whereas, like, if you're able to name those feelings, if you're able to kind of bring them outside of you, if you're able to say, I'm not angry, I'm actually feeling really rejected. I'm not angry, I'm actually feeling really sad. I'm not angry, I'm actually feeling really hurt. Like, if you're able to name that feeling, you have so much more control over it, and your partner has so much more understanding and empathy towards you.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a really important piece to why it even matters to be vulnerable in your relationship. It puts you in context, right? So, like what you're saying, if somebody's walking around and they're angry or they're upset and your partner doesn't know why, they could react with anger or react with defensiveness or react in an unsupportive way, versus if you put on the table what you're experiencing, again, building more empathy, giving them context, letting them know, what's going on in your inner world so that they could connect with you rather than sort of go head to head and be in conflict.
And I think it's super easy to meet anger with anger. Really, really easy.
Yeah, for sure.
Very quick go-to. But it's kind of hard, and I rarely see it. I'm not saying it never happens, but to meet someone's sadness with anger. Yeah. Someone's, like, hurt with anger. Yeah. Generally, like, it tones down that emotional escalation, and, like, you're feeling a lot of feelings, but you're feeling them in this kind of quieter, sadder space than, like, angrier, triggered space. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Definitely.
And I think, like, that concept of putting your partner in context is extremely valuable. Like, I always think about it in terms of, I work with a lot of couples with sexual issues. And when sexual issues arise in a relationship, that can cause all kinds of conflict, right? All kinds of conflict, all kinds of feelings of anger, rejection, and acceptance. Is it my fault? And if you don't really know the context, sure, those feelings totally make sense, but, like, a lot of people with sexual issues have a history of sexual trauma or childhood sexual abuse. And if that doesn't come out, if that vulnerability is not accessed and your partner doesn't know this like really critical part of you,
Yeah.
and what might be contributing to these sexual issues in your relationship, they're gonna treat it a very different way if they do. And I've had these like sessions when that's been discussed, and it's like it completely shifts the relationship.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's having an accurate, it's helping yourself be accurately understood rather than being constantly misunderstood, which is really important and really beneficial. And your relationship should be the safe place, the secure place, comfortable, supportive. Like, that's where you should feel all of those things most of the time, if not all of the time. And this is a really powerful way to achieve that.
And going in with that, it's like when your relationship is that, you're building trust. You're sharing your inner world, you're sharing your feelings, you're sharing parts of yourself. And every time it's like the emotional bank account, like this is putting deposits in your emotional bank account, because every time you share a vulnerable part of yourself and it is met with acceptance, genuinely loving curiosity, empathy, validation, you say, this was a safe space for me to do this.
Yeah.
This puts a trust marble in the bank account.
Yeah. And that's really, really powerful. Building trust and creating a culture of trust, creating the belief that I can trust my partner with even the hardest things, and that they can trust me as well. And also just getting to know each other better. Like, it sounds kind of superficial, but it's not. Like, deeply knowing your partner and knowing, like, really knowing what makes them tick and really knowing what goes on, you know, in their head. It allows you to put their behavior and their actions in context so much more accurately on a consistent basis. That alone reduces conflict and improves the quality of a relationship.
I mean, there's that quote, it's a little cheesy, but to know me is to love me. And I firmly believe that. I don't think you can have a true, deep, connected love without a true, deep, connected sense of knowing each other.
Sure. For sure. You know, it's a good way to do this.
What's a good way to do this?
Sharing your life dreams.
Yes, we definitely talked about this in episode 15. So how does sharing life dreams tie into this for you?
I think if you think about being vulnerable, I mean, your life dreams are sort of your core beliefs, values, goals, like those secret things. And you know, what's interesting is they're not necessarily negative. In fact, they're really quite the opposite. So a lot of the vulnerable conversations we've been talking about today are of a negative, more of a negative tone, whereas this is sharing your positive things that are still vulnerable, because it's a risk to say, my dream is to do this, or my dream is to own this, or my dream is to live here, or to travel the world, or, you're risking rejection of your ideas and what's important to you. So, I think having a balance of, not knowing only your partner's negative, vulnerable thoughts and feelings, but also the positives is really important.
Yeah, and I think it can be tied to, like, our really early pivotal experiences where a lot of our stuff comes from. I think a really reasonable thing is to say, like, I felt neglected as a child, so a part of my dream is to have this family that's really connected, and that's a really beautiful, wonderful dream. But knowing that that is how your partner maybe felt as a child, like, really puts that dream into context and creates a lot of opportunity for support, validation, understanding like why that's important and why they may be triggered in certain situations.
Yeah, definitely. It goes into triggers, and knowing what triggers your partner deep down helps you not react so harshly when something gets triggered in the moment. which is huge for not having as many escalated conflicts.
Yeah.
So that's a big one.
And that's what we want to avoid, right? So how do we become more open and vulnerable with our partners? How do we get past the scary?
Great question. It's a hard one. So I think, the same way that you do it to share with your partner, you also need to sort of replicate that to invite your partner to share with you. So sort of like everyone has to be on an equal playing field. And it's about creating safety, right? Emotional safety. How do we do that? How do we create an atmosphere in our relationship where everyone feels safe? Everyone is not worried about risking rejection or judgment or anything like that. And it goes back, the first piece is communication and how we talk to one another and how we share our feelings. So go back to episode 1. If you haven't listened to it, listen to it. If you have, maybe re-listen to it. And download the communication tip sheet, because those are the really core principles for communicating in a way that establishes safety and trust with your partner.
And I think in terms of safety, like there's a beautiful vulnerable conversation to have with your partner just off the bat, if this isn't kind of the culture of your relationship, is what are your safety needs? What are your emotional safety needs? What are your physical safety needs? Like when we think about safety needs, like most of us will just scapegoat to like, well, I have shelter, I have food, all's good. But like our sense of safety gets shaken up all the time. There's a ton of stuff going on that affects our sense of safety all the time. And to be able to use those communication tips and have this really genuine conversation about safety needs is a great, almost like practice in terms of having a vulnerable conversation where it's not necessarily about an issue or about, it's more about a concept that's really tied to vulnerability.
And I think, just to give some examples of what you're referring to when you say a safety need, someone it may be really important to them to sit really close to their partner on the couch and almost have physical contact while they're talking about it for reassurance, whereas someone else may need the opposite. They may need to sit separately and have some space. They may need to disconnect after the conversation for a period of time to do some physiological self-soothing, versus someone else who may say, can you just make sure you stay with me and we stay together for like at least 20 minutes after the conversation just to kind of get back to normal life? Things like that, where just different nuanced things that we all need.
And all of those have stories behind them. And sharing those stories and being lovingly curious around those stories is what creates that depth in the relationship. Another big one in terms of how to be more vulnerable is really keeping the 4 horsemen in major check. Like I think this is where these vulnerable emotional conversations are where like the 4 horsemen cannot like absolutely like kibosh it. Send them to the glue factory.
Don't send them to the glue factory. No, send them to a rescue farm for horses that are badly behaved and they can live out their days on the rescue farm.
Okay. But, like, I can't drive this enough that, for you and for your partner, this is a very exposing conversation. And even the slightest criticism, a tinge of defensiveness, not even talking about contempt, because contempt's already gonna shut that conversation down, can be so impactful. And then the question is, what message are you trying to send, and what message is your partner internalizing when you're having this really open, like accessing parts of yourself you don't normally access conversation, and this kind of stuff comes up? That's not a deposit in the trust account. That's a withdrawal from it.
Yeah, and you don't want to be making a withdrawal from that account, especially when you're trying something new. This is essentially trying something new, right? Committing to being more vulnerable. If you're not familiar with the 4 Horsemen, go back to episode 4. It's called How to Get Divorced. Give it a listen. It's important. And also similar to that is to not offer advice, solutions, or feedback. These vulnerabilities have probably been there for a lifetime. If,
they probably predate the relationship.
So trying to fix or talk out of or advise is not going to feel supportive. It's going to feel dismissive and like you're not really understanding. So your goal during that conversation is really to focus on empathy and showing your partner that you understand how they feel, not that you've been there necessarily, but you can understand why they feel the way they feel. It makes sense to you and you're there to support them. That's really important.
Yeah, vulnerability and empathy, they go hand in hand. Like for there to be vulnerability, we have to kind of prime ourselves and trust that there's going to be empathy on the other end. So it's really key to also understand, like, empathy is one of these words that gets thrown around. Like, I feel like it's become like a hot buzzword.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't really know what it means or what it looks like. So Brene Brown, again, love her, has a great video on YouTube on empathy. We're going to link it to the show notes. I really encourage you to watch that one. But empathy is really focusing on understanding, validating, and putting yourself in your partner's shoes, as opposed to like, let me problem solve, or no, don't have this feeling.
Right. It's not about
okay.
fixing.
Yeah.
It's not about fixing. It's about accepting your partner's experience. And I love this video by Brene Brown. Like, this is my favorite video. And I show this video to parents for their kids, relationships with their kids. They show this to couples. It's a lot shorter than the first one. It's maybe 3 minutes. Go watch it. And it really depicts the difference between empathy done wrong and empathy done right. And it's definitely worth a watch. We love that video.
My big thing from that video that I think is such a common mistake that people make in empathy is empathy never starts with, well, at least. I don't know if it's from this video
It is.
Like that empathy never starts with, well, at least, because, and I think it's, well, at least never comes from a bad place, right? But it's, imagine like your partner just poured their heart out and you go, well, at least, that's not your situation anymore. Yeah. It's so dismissive. It doesn't mean like, and I think that comes from something we talked about. I don't even remember in what episode, but we'll go back and we'll link it to the show notes. Getting comfortable with your partner's feelings. I think, well, at least is like the red flag of like, wow, your feelings are feeling like I want to do something about it because it's really hard for me to hold this feeling. Yeah. But empathy is really becoming a container for your partner's feelings, not a problem solver for your partner's feelings.
Yeah, that's a really good point. In that episode, I don't remember the number, we will put it below, but it was called Why Happy is Overrated. But we'll put that below. That's worth a listen. So that's a really key piece. Oh boy, that was a scary one, guys. That was a scary one. Yeah. Look, we don't want you to just listen. As always, we want you to listen and integrate our tips into your relationship. So what we've done is created a step-by-step how-to guide for empathy, because it's that important. So definitely download it. You can get it on our website at simplygreatrelationships.com/017.
Let's talk about takeaways.
Ugh, yeah.
A lot of takeaways from this one.
This was not the most common topic, I think. Not the most common, but very important. My takeaway would probably be just, like, simply the value of this. The fact that that it's worthwhile to invest time and energy in carving out time to have conversations around vulnerable topics with your partner because of how valuable that is in and of itself, I think would be my takeaway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My takeaway, I think, would be that, like, empathy and vulnerability need to live together.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I think that the bigger takeaway for me is that, like, vulnerability is what allows your partner to truly know you.
Mm-hmm.
And without that, it's like there's one of two situations that results. It's like either you get the, well, I don't even know them anymore.
Yeah.
Which is not where you want your relationship to go. Or the, like, I don't feel like they let me in.
Mm-hmm.
Which you don't want. You know, so it's like the value of letting your partner in
Mm-hmm.
is so, in the context of a relationship, is so grand because it's almost like the glue.
Yeah. Yeah. Very important. Good takeaway.
Mm-hmm.
Good takeaway. Oh, so that's all for today. We hope you start to take these tips and integrate them into your relationship right away. Be sure to get the freebie. So we'd love for you to continue the conversation with us in our Facebook group. If you're not already in it, we're going to hook you up with tips, tricks, and live streams exclusively for our members. And you can join us at facebook.com/groups/simplygreatrelationships, or just go on our website, simplygreatrelationships.com, and click the link. And we will be in there to chat with you and answer questions and just give you some more good stuff. Until next week.
Yeah, and we'd love to hear, how, your stories of vulnerability and sharing vulnerabilities go.
Definitely.
Because talking about sharing vulnerability is vulnerable in itself. So.
That's true. So that could be a safe place to start.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Till next week, guys.
We'll see ya. Bye.